doorstep of Nancy Guthrie's Tucson residence. The Pima County Sheriff was blunt. There were unmistakable signs of forced entry. He stated, "We received your message. We understand the terms." The family's plea was desperate. "We are begging you. Return our mother to us." But surveillance footage tells a colder story. At 1:52 in the Canger morning, a camera at a residence 5 miles from Nancy Guthrie's home captures a figure. A man. He is wearing a backpack and, strangely, clutching a second one against his chest. This second bag features distinct reflective stripes, an exact match to the pack the intruder wore when he breached Nancy's door. Rewind to 1:47 a.m. In the pitch-black void of the Arizona desert, a doorbell camera abruptly stops recording. 41 minutes later, at 2:28, a pacemaker monitor on an 84-year-old woman's phone loses its signal. Between those two timestamps, something transpired inside that quiet brick estate in the Catalina foothills north of Tucson, Arizona. Something violent, something that left blood smears on the front porch, something that left essential daily medication abandoned on the kitchen counter, something that left a family shattered and a nation desperate for answers. This is the case of Nancy Guthrie, an 84-year-old mother, grandmother, and devout churchgoer who vanished from the sanctuary she had occupied for 50 years. Taken, according to investigators, by force, in the dead of night. Abducted from a neighborhood where crimes like this simply do not happen. As of today, she remains missing. No suspects named, no arrests made, and the evidence investigators have unearthed reveals a narrative far more complex than anyone initially anticipated. This is not speculation. This is not theory. Everything you are about to hear has been reported by law enforcement, corroborated by investigators, or documented through public records and verified news sources. This is the established fact pattern. Before we dissect the events of January 31st, you need to understand who Nancy Guthrie really is. Every news outlet in the country identifies her only as Savannah Guthrie's mother. That is true, but it may also be the very reason she was targeted. To understand why, you have to examine the life she built long before the fame. Nancy Ellen Long was born on January 27th, 1942, in Fort Wright, Kentucky, a small river town just across the Ohio from Cincinnati. In the early 70s, she and her husband, Charles, moved to the Tucson area and fell in love with the desert landscape. In 1975, they bought a single-story brick home in the Catalina foothills, 5 bedrooms, 4.5 baths, a pool in the back, with the wild desert stretching in every direction. They paid $85,000 for it. That house became the center of their world. Nancy and Charles raised 3 children inside those walls. Annie, who became a poet and jeweler, their son, Cameron, and Savannah, their youngest. The girl who would go on to become co-anchor of NBC's Today Show and one of the most recognized faces on American television. Annie, the eldest, pursued a life of art and words. She published a poetry collection titled The Good Dark in 2015 and served as marketing director at the University of Arizona Poetry Center. She married Tommaso Cioni, an Italian-born AP biology teacher who has taught at a Tucson area school for more than 15 years. Annie and her husband settled close to Nancy, staying rooted in the same desert community where she had been raised. Savannah was born in Melbourne, Australia, in 1971, where the family was living temporarily. They moved back to Arizona when she was 4. The Catalina Foothills house became the only home she ever truly knew. She attended the University of Arizona, staying close to her mother, even through her college years. Her first job in journalism was at a small station in Butte, Montana. Nancy supported the move, even though the idea of her daughter leaving was heartbreaking. From Montana, Savannah moved to stations in Missouri and then back to Tucson, working at KVOA, the city's NBC affiliate, before eventually making her way to Washington, D.C. She became a lawyer, then returned to journalism, working as a legal analyst, a White House correspondent, and finally, in 2012, co-anchor of The Today Show. She married Mike Feldman. They had 2 children, Vale and Charlie. But here is the detail that matters most. Even after the children grew up, even after Savannah's career took her to New York, the sisters had a pact. On any given weekend, one of them would stay home so their mother would never be alone. It was unspoken. It was automatic. It was the kind of devotion that tells you everything about who Nancy Guthrie was to her family. Savannah described it years later in an interview. We had a spoken or unspoken pact. She said that on the weekends, even though they were college girls, one of them would always stay home on a weekend night so their mom wouldn't be alone. That was just something they did together as sisters. In 1988, Charles Guthrie died at the age of 49 on a mining exploration trip in Mexico. Savannah was just 16 years old. Nancy found herself isolated in that sprawling house, shouldering the weight of 3 children and a grief that would have shattered a lesser spirit. But she didn't run. She dug her heels into the desert floor. She remained in that home. She guided her children through the storm. And for the next 38 years, that brick residence in the Catalina foothills became her sanctuary, her North Star, the single location on Earth where she felt untouchable. Nancy evolved into a pillar of her community. She was a devout presence at St. Andrew's Church, never missing a service and weaving a tight safety net of friendships within the congregation. When the pandemic forced the world behind screens, she pivoted, attending virtual mass with a friend as part of her unshakable Sunday ritual. It was this precise regimen that would eventually signal the alarm that she was gone. No matter how high Savannah's career soared, the desert called her home. She and Mike brought Vale and Charlie to visit Nancy at least twice annually. In March of 2024, Savannah's co-anchor, Craig Melvin, stopped by the house during a trip to Tucson. Savannah shared the moment on Instagram, captioning it "Friendship and Love in Action." Then, in November of 2025, barely 3 months before she vanished into thin air, Savannah brought a camera crew to Tucson for a Today Show segment. She branded herself a daughter of the desert. She took her mother to lunch at El Charro, a staple of the downtown scene. And Nancy, 84 years old and mentally razor sharp, smiled and described her life in the arid landscape the way she always had. "It's the air," she insisted. "The pace of life is unhurried and soft." She chuckled about the javelinas raiding her garden, those wild, pig-like creatures that roam the Arizona brush. The Catalina foothills, the enclave Nancy claimed as home, sits perched along the Santa Catalina Mountains. It held a population of roughly 53,000 souls with a median age of 56. The estates were expansive, often sitting on more than an acre, set back from the asphalt and veiled by dense desert flora, cacti, and thick shrubbery. Residents described it as tranquil, secure, and tight-knit. But the neighborhood possessed one feature that would prove critical in the investigation. There were no street lights. When the sun dropped behind the Catalina foothills, the blackness was absolute. It was the kind of abyss that desert towns cultivate for stargazing and privacy, the kind of shadow where no one can witness what is unfolding on a neighbor's doorstep. 3 months after that lunch at El Charro, Nancy's blood stained the front porch. This is what we have confirmed about January 31st, 2026. And I need you to focus on this timeline because there is a void in the sequence that investigators have yet to fill. That Saturday evening, Nancy was surrounded by family. Dinner, card games, it was a standard night in a standard home, the type of gathering this family had enjoyed hundreds of times before. At approximately 9:45, that night, Nancy's son-in-law drove her back. He watched her walk to the front door. She stepped inside. The door clicked shut. That was the final moment anyone in her family laid eyes on Nancy Guthrie. Now, this is where the narrative begins to fracture. For roughly 4 hours, the night was silent. No alarms, no anomalies. We assume Nancy followed her decades-old bedtime ritual and went to sleep in the house she had occupied for 50 years. Then, at 1:47 in the morning on February 1st, her Nest doorbell camera went offline. This wasn't a power failure. It wasn't a software bug. Someone physically disabled the hardware. They intended to ensure that whatever horror came next would remain unseen. And honestly, they nearly pulled it off. But here's the variable the perpetrator likely missed. The camera's cloud systems continued to harvest data even after the physical unit was compromised. The FBI would later extract images and fragments from those remote servers that the intruder clearly believed were destroyed. Keep that in mind. It becomes the smoking gun. At 2:12 in the morning, 25 minutes after the camera went black, the sensors caught movement. Someone was there. But because the video stream had been severed, there is no visual. The system flagged a presence it could not display. Then, at 2:28 in the morning, Nancy's pacemaker application lost contact with her smartphone. Let me break down the significance of that. A pacemaker app acts as a digital lifeline, constantly syncing with the patient's phone to track cardiac rhythm, upload diagnostics. For that tether to snap, specific conditions must be met. Either the phone was smashed, the device was taken, out of range, or the pacemaker ceased transmission. Every single one of those scenarios points to the same conclusion. Something catastrophic happened to Nancy Guthrie at 2:28 in the morning, and between 1:47 and 2:28, an unknown subject was inside or lurking around her property for 41 minutes. Now, lock that number in your mind, because every move investigators made, every theory, every allocated dollar, every lead they chased circles back to the implications of those 41 minutes. If you break into a residence for a quick score, you are in and out. Homicide detectives and criminologists will tell you that. Veteran burglars work in under 5 minutes. Breach, grab, vanish. 10 minutes implies you are either an amateur or you are hunting for something specific. 15 minutes is flirting with disaster. 20 minutes changes the profile entirely. The nature of the crime began to shift from simple property theft to something far more sinister. 41 minutes isn't a burglary. Spending 41 minutes inside a target's residence implies a terrifying level of confidence. It suggests you aren't worried about apprehension. You know the floor plan. You know the blind spots in the security coverage. You know the rhythm of the neighborhood streets. You know exactly when the family isn't coming home. Or more disturbingly, you simply do not, regardless of the motive. When Pima County Sheriff Chris Nanos reviewed that timeline, he made a call that stunned the press. He didn't just mobilize the missing persons unit or search and rescue teams. He brought in homicide investigators. Homicide. To be clear, the standard cavalry was deployed as well aerial drones, K-9 units, civilian volunteers, and Border Patrol agents. The entire machinery of a massive search operation roared to life. Yet, bringing in murder, detectives at such a nascent stage, without a body, broadcast a frequency that every veteran officer recognized instantly. When journalists pressed him on that irregularity, his response was measured, but the subtext was loud. He explained that he receives intelligence briefings on county-wide rescue operations every single day. People go missing with routine frequency, and rarely, he noted, does law enforcement ever attach a homicide designation to those files. Then, he delivered a 6-word assessment that pivoted the entire trajectory of the case. There is something that is not right. Here, a sheriff does not make that kind of public declaration lightly. It wasn't a guess. It wasn't theatrical posturing. It was a top-tier law enforcement executive going on the record to confirm that the physical evidence inside that house completely contradicted the narrative, specifically the narrative of a ransom demand. When units pulled up to Nancy's property on the afternoon of February 1st, they confirmed the family's worst fears. Nancy had vanished, but the items essential to her existence remained behind. Her cell phone was there, her wallet was there, and her daily prescriptions were sitting right on the kitchen counter. We need to pause here, because this specific detail hasn't received the scrutiny it warrants. Nancy Guthrie lived with a pacemaker. She suffered from hypertension. She battled cardiac conditions that necessitated strict pharmaceutical regulation. Sheriff Nanos publicly verified that these pills were not optional supplements. They were the chemical lifeline maintaining her physiological balance. Skipping a single dose could induce severe medical trauma. Missing several days would likely be a death sentence. Dispatch recordings archived on Broadcastify confirm that emergency responders were alerted to her pacemaker and cardiac history immediately. Yet, those bottles sat on the counter, fully visible in their usual morning location, ready for use. Whoever loitered in that house for 41 minutes saw them, and they ignored them. Consider the implications of that choice in a kidnapping scenario. If you abduct a target intending to leverage them for a payout, their survival is your currency. You cannot trade a corpse for cash. A hostage in medical decline creates a logistical nightmare you cannot manage. Securing the victim's medicine isn't some high-level strategy. It is elementary. It is the absolute baseline requirement for a successful extortion plot. The pills were within reach. It would have taken 5 seconds to swipe them. This implies the abductor was either oblivious to her medical needs, which seems improbable given the duration of the intrusion, or they knew and simply did not care if she lived long enough to generate a ransom. Both scenarios sent chills through the investigation. Neither aligned with the theory of a transactional abduction. Then, the forensic team found the blood. Nancy Guthrie's DNA was identified on the front entryway. News crews documenting the perimeter captured footage of a disturbing trail near the threshold. There was also clear evidence of forced entry. While officials refused to elaborate on the volume of blood or the severity of the wounds, the forensic tableau was distinct enough for the sheriff to make the call he did. The surveillance doorbell had been physically disabled. Essentials were left behind. Vital medication was abandoned. There was blood on the concrete, and Nancy Guthrie was gone. Within 24 hours of the initial 911 call, the investigation ballooned into a massive multi-agency manhunt. Drones scanned the desert floor. Watchdogs tracked through the rugged terrain. Rescue teams grid-searched the Catalina foothills and the peripheral zones. Civilian volunteers mobilized. Even the U.S. Border Patrol, leveraging their tactical expertise in the harsh southern Arizona topography, contributed manpower and assets. By the evening of February 2nd, the FBI entered the fray. Although, as we will explore later, the specifics of their jurisdiction raised questions of their own. Hundreds of searchers were hunting for Nancy Guthrie, but her captor had a 41-minute head start that had stretched into days. For 9 agonizing days, the public heard silence. Investigators worked the leads. Her family was begging for answers. The entire country was watching. Yet, we had nothing, no photos, no descriptions, not a single solid lead to chase. That silence broke on February 10th. The FBI dropped the photos, and the dynamic of the investigation shifted instantly. FBI Director Kash Patel released 4 grainy, black and white stills salvaged from the back end of Nancy's security system. This was the very camera the intruder had attempted to smash the system that refused to die, recording silently after it was supposed to be offline. The frames revealed a phantom standing on the Guthrie porch. A full ski mask, heavy trousers, a jacket, and gloves. There was a black backpack slung over the shoulders and a handgun holstered awkwardly right over the crotch. The Bureau also dropped 2 video clips capturing the figure clawing at the lens. This individual came to Nancy's door, armed and masked in the dead of night, determined to remain a ghost. They failed. The feds pegged the suspect as a male, roughly 5'9" to 5 to 10, with an average build. But the backpack provided the first real break. It was identified as a black 25-liter Ozark Trail hiker pack. And that is a crucial breadcrumb. Ozark Trail is a house brand sold exclusively at Walmart. Investigators immediately swarmed surveillance tapes from every Walmart location in the Tucson metro area. Later reports suggested the suspect's entire ensemble might have been pulled off a Walmart rack, though the Pima County Sheriff's Department warned that the clothing wasn't technically exclusive to the retailer, keeping the connection as a strong theory rather than a confirmed fact. But this told the profilers something vital. We weren't dealing with someone who had unlimited funds or access to black market gear. This was someone who walked into a big box store, bought a backpack off the shelf, used it to stage a kidnapping. Retired law enforcement officials who analyzed the footage doubled down on this theory. A former FBI special agent noted the gun handling was sloppy amateur hour. The stance, the movement patterns, nothing about it screamed military training or professional contract work. The consensus was terrifyingly simple. This was a dangerous individual who had acquired a weapon and a plan, but possessed absolutely zero tactical competence. The FBI's elite video forensics unit was dispatched to the property. Specialists in digital imagery and physics were seen hauling high-tech gear into a white tent pitched right at Nancy's front door. The structure went up at 7:45 and came down by 9:07. 5. Federal agents worked the scene. Photos snapped by Fox News Digital captured the team exiting with a height chart, implying they were physically recreating the intruder's stance to cross-reference the surveillance angles and nail down the suspect's exact measurements. A heavy hitter from that forensic team had previously worked the Brian Kohberger case in Idaho. The Bureau also stood up a dedicated tip site for the disappearance, aggregating case files, stills, ring footage, reward tiers, and Nancy's physical stats. Within days, the FBI reported an influx of over 13,000 tips. The Pima County Sheriff's Department was fielding thousands more on their end. The combined volume would eventually top 30,000. The world had stared into the mask of the monster who took Nancy Guthrie. But here is the nightmare of 30,000 tips. Most are noise, and the ones that looked like solid gold often led to agonizing dead ends. Now, we need to talk about the ransom letters. On the surface, the narrative is standard. Abduction for cash. But when you dissect the specifics, the logic fractures. On February 2nd, 24 hours after Nancy vanished, KOLD-TV in Tucson received a demand. TMZ got a similar package around the same time. The writers wanted payment in Bitcoin for Nancy's safe release. The notes listed a specific wallet address where the crypto could be transferred. According to TMZ, the letter also referenced damage inside the home that hadn't been released to the press, proving the author had intimate knowledge of the crime scene. TMZ verified the wallet address was live on the blockchain, though they kept the alphanumeric string private. KGN9, the local Arizona affiliate, put a number on it, $6 million in Bitcoin. The deadlines were tight, 5 o'clock on February 5th and again on the 9th. Both passed with lethal threats attached, but a retired FBI agent caught a linguistic slip in the text. The note used the term USD when referring to American cash. That is not how locals talk. Americans say dollars or just use the symbol. USD is the language of international wire transfers, banking documents, or non-native speakers. The former agent suggested this was a tell, Either the writer was foreign, or it was a clumsy attempt to sound like a stranger. In a kidnapping investigation, there are no small details. In the anatomy of an investigation, the smallest fragments of communication often betray the biggest secrets. Sheriff Nanos addressed a subject of the ransom notes directly, making it clear he was not discarding the possibility they were real, while the sheriff's office confirmed via social media that they were tracking these leads with intensity. Law enforcement maintained a disciplined silence, refusing to validate or dismiss the note's legitimacy. The critical question whether these messages originated from Nancy's actual abductor or a sadistic opportunist remained an agonizing unknown. On February 4th, the family broke their silence. Savannah Guthrie and her siblings posted a video to Instagram, marking their first direct appeal to the individuals holding their mother. Savannah stared into the lens, flanked by her sister Annie and her brother Cameron, projecting a united front. "We received your message," she said, her voice steady, "and we understand. We are begging you to bring our mother back so we can be whole again. That is the only path to peace for us. She is incredibly valuable to us, and we are ready to pay. But in an era where digital reality is easily forged and voices can be mimicked by software, the family demanded proof, something verifiable to show she was alive. The response was a void. They received nothing. That same day, following an interview with NBC's Tom Lamas, President Donald Trump dialed Savannah directly. He pledged federal assets to the hunt, expressing his personal hope for a safe resolution to Nancy's disappearance. The White House amplified the signal, utilizing official social media channels to solicit leads from the public. Savannah, who had been slated to anchor NBC's broadcast of the 2026 Winter Olympics opening ceremonies from Milan, had scrapped her plans instantly, boarding a flight to Tucson the second the news broke. Then came February 5th. The first deadline evaporated into silence. Then February 9th. The second deadline came and went. No contact through the arranged channels, no attempts to bargain, no proof she was still breathing, and zero repercussions for the ignored demands. This is the moment seasoned kidnapping investigators began to see the cracks in the narrative, because professional ransom operations simply do not function this way. When a target is taken for profit, the lifeline of communication is the engine of the crime. Captors stay in touch to tighten the psychological screws. They offer proof of life because it greases the wheels of payment. They set strict timelines to manufacture panic, and they negotiate because the ultimate objective is cash, and rigidity is the enemy of profit. Every method of contact is calculated to shield their identity while keeping the channel open. Instructions for the drop are precise, designed to secure the funds without exposing the crew. It is a delicate balance of managing the family's desperation against the police's surveillance. But here, the pattern was broken. 2 deadlines passed with no fallout. No evidence of life was ever offered. A direct line between the perpetrators and the Guthrie family was never solidified. The entire framework of the ransom demand began to look less like a criminal enterprise and more like a diversion, a script written to send detectives chasing ghosts. Yet, the story was about to take a darker turn. On February 11th, TMZ was contacted again, but the tone had shifted. This wasn't the voice of the kidnapper. This was a voice from the shadows, claiming to know who the kidnapper was. The price for this intelligence was 1 Bitcoin, approximately $66,000. If they want the name of the individual involved, the message read, "Then I want 1 Bitcoin sent to this wallet. Time is more than relevant." The wallet address did not match the original ransom demands. TMZ immediately flagged the FBI. The source alleged they had already attempted to contact Cameron and Annie via email and text, but had been ignored, forcing them to turn to the media. In the days that followed, the source sent 2 additional communiques. The second was tinged with frustration about not being treated as a credible asset. "I am not being taken seriously," they insisted. They invoked the name of Carlos Palazuelos, the FedEx driver who had been briefly held and cleared by police, stating they had no desire to be incriminated like that Carlos guy. The Bitcoin, they claimed, was their exit strategy funds to vanish after blowing the whistle. They framed their position as a dangerous gamble, risking both personal safety and freedom. That final sentiment gave observers pause. Harvey Levin, the founder of TMZ, analyzed the phrasing as a sign the informant was dangerously close to the inner circle, implying a direct link to the abductor. Levin also highlighted a cryptic remark about the difference between yesterday and today that he described as bone-chilling, though he withheld specifics to avoid compromising the active law enforcement operation. The informant declared this would be his second and final offer. In the third message, the stakes were raised again. They escalated their price to $100,000, effectively matching the FBI's newly doubled reward. Then came the pivot, a specific proposal. They wanted $50,000 in Bitcoin, deposited immediately. In exchange, a name, the identity of the main individual, along with the data needed to hunt him down. The remaining $50,000 would drop only after handcuffs were on wrists. The sender was emphatic. They wouldn't touch the initial payment until an arrest was verified. And then there was that phrase, main individual. It was a linguistic anomaly. It hadn't appeared in any prior contact. Not the kidnapper, not the abductor, the main individual. The implication was clear. This was a conspiracy, not a solo act. A TMZ executive producer observed that the syntax across all 4 communications, the original ransom note and the 3 subsequent emails, pointed to a single author, yet the voice had shifted. The 3 tip emails carried a distinct transactional tone, separate from the desperate demand of the ransom note. It was, as TMZ's Harvey Levin put it, a narrative that stands on its own. The FBI, however, didn't bite. No coins moved to that Bitcoin wallet. Whether the feds saw it as a desperate bluff or were already tracking the sender through back channels remains classified. News Nation reported that the Bureau's refusal to pay signaled deep skepticism. Investigators likely feared the emails were a fabrication. "I think there is a possibility of that," a source admitted. A TMZ producer told News Nation, "I think that is definitely a concern they have, that this is someone just punking the investigation." Meanwhile, the crypto angle added a new layer of digital intrigue. Fortune magazine broke the story that a fraction of Bitcoin had actually moved to the wallet address listed in the original ransom note. It was a digital breadcrumb, since blockchain transactions are permanently etched into the ledger. They are traceable. Analysts were quick to point out that despite the dark web's reputation for secrecy, Bitcoin is functionally transparent. Every transfer is logged for the world to see. As one analyst described it, the blockchain is an unblinking eye. Every single transaction is recorded and traceable forever. And while agents chased digital ghosts, at least one real-world vulture had already been caged. 42-year-old Derek Kella from California was arrested and charged with sending bogus ransom demands to the Guthrie family. According to the criminal complaint, Kella allegedly fired off 2 text messages to a relative on February 4th, posing as Nancy's abductor, demanding cash. The law hit back hard. He was charged with intent to transmit a ransom demand and using a telecommunications device to anonymously abuse, threaten, or harass. He appeared in court on February 13th, was released pending arraignment. So by the middle of February, the board was a mess of contradictions. An original note demanding $6 million that investigators couldn't verify. A series of tip emails from someone who might be an insider or just someone standing close to the fire. At least one confirmed fraud. 2 deadlines that passed with 0 consequence. A small Bitcoin transfer to the original wallet. And absolutely no proof that Nancy Guthrie was still alive. The ransom notes were supposed to be the roadmap. Instead, they just drove the investigation further into the fog. On February 10th, same day, the FBI released those haunting doorbell images. A traffic stop in Rio Rico, Arizona, 60 miles south of Tucson, spiraled into a spectacle involving the detention of Carlos Palazuel, a FedEx delivery driver. What do you want, people? Your name is everywhere. I'm innocent. That's all I can say. I have nothing to do with this. Were you shocked? Yeah, I was. Tell me. Come on. What do you expect me to do? They held me against my will. They didn't even read me my rights until 2 hours later. Okay. Look at my wrist. It's all swollen from the cuffs. And did you have any idea that this was about, do you know who Nancy Guthrie is? No. That's the problem. No. I don't know anything. Sources confirmed the Pima County Sheriff's Department, and the FBI executed a search warrant on a property and vehicle in the Rio Rico area. Palazuel was grilled for hours. He stuck to his story. He did not know Nancy Guthrie. By the morning of February 11th, authorities confirmed that the search had concluded and Palazuel had been cut loose without charges. Online, however, the court of public opinion had already convicted a different target. Early speculation zeroed in on Tommaso Cioni, Nancy Guthrie's husband and Nancy's son-in-law. Cioni is an Italian-born AP biology teacher who has worked at Basis Oro Valley in Tucson for more than 15 years. The rumors were fueled by nothing more than his proximity to the family and his presence in public records. There was 0 hard evidence linking him to the disappearance. Sheriff Nanos addressed the noise without clearing the board, stating grimly that at this stage, everybody is still a suspect. He stopped short of labeling Cioni or anyone else a suspect. But in the digital echo chamber, theories were already spinning out of control, creating a static of misinformation that detectives knew could bury the truth. February 8th marked a turning point. 7 days of silence. Investigators pivoted, descending on Nancy's residence with a darker purpose. They cracked open the septic tank. This wasn't a rescue mission anymore. You don't dredge a sewage tank hoping to find a survivor. You do it when you're hunting for a body or pieces of one. The yellow tape, previously stripped away at the victim's house, was strung up once more. The property was no longer just a home. It was a crime scene again. A retired FBI special agent observed the critical lapse, that dangerous window of time when the location sat unguarded. It created a nightmare scenario. During that gap, anyone could have slipped in to plant a false trail or scrub a real one, muddying the waters for any future trial. Then came Valentine's Day. Under the cover of darkness, tactical units from the Pima County Sheriff's Department, flanked by federal agents, descended on a house near East Orange Grove Road and North First Avenue, roughly 2 miles from Nancy Guthrie's front door. Streets were locked down. The raid stretched on for several hours. While the Sheriff's Department acknowledged on social media that the strike was tied to the Guthrie inquiry, they kept the details under lock and key at the Bureau's request. A source within local law enforcement later told the press that 3 individuals were held, 2 men and a mother. But the insider offered a crucial caveat in the chaos of a high-risk warrant. Handcuffs don't always mean guilt. Often they are simply procedure to secure the scene. Simultaneously, a separate team struck a different target, the asphalt expanse of a Culver's restaurant, barely 2 miles from Nancy's residence. Officers boxed in a vehicle, grilling the driver for hours. A Range Rover SUV was eventually tagged and hauled away on a flatbed. The scene, located at First Avenue and River Road, felt electric. For a fleeting moment, it seemed the dam was breaking. It wasn't. The Pima County Sheriff's Department poured cold water on the speculation the next morning. 0 arrests. The cells remained empty. The official release framed the operation as a routine follow-up on a tip, confirming that a traffic stop had occurred, resulting in an interview but no handcuffs. Former FBI analyst John Miller weighed in during a broadcast, characterizing the raid as a promising lead that evaporated upon contact. He described it as another blind alley, warning the public to brace themselves. In a hunt this complex, such dead ends are inevitable. I want to point out we may see a couple more of these as this goes on, Miller cautioned. A separate thread had been pulled on February 10th, involving a person of interest intercepted at a Culver's restaurant on Friday night. Sheriff Nanos later verified to a local station that the man was indeed on their radar regarding the case, noting he had answered questions before walking free. By mid-February, sources told NBC News that detectives were cooling on several prime targets, including the man from the Valentine's Day raid, Carlos Palazuelos, and significantly, any of Nancy Guthrie's own family. The sources emphasized that while no one was formally cleared, the crosshairs were moving. The investigation was drifting away from the usual suspects debated online and toward a shadowy figure the public hadn't yet met. The math was frustrating. 30,000 tips, hundreds of officers, 16 agonizing days. The result? The only person charged was a troll from California who sent hoax messages. Yet, in that labyrinth of false starts, a genuine clue finally surfaced. Scouring the harsh terrain, teams had collected roughly 16 gloves from the perimeter surrounding Nancy's home and the adjacent desert. The vast majority were trash latex discards left behind by the hundreds of personnel and volunteers who had been sweeping the area since February 1st. But one stood out. It was discovered in a roadside field approximately 2 miles from Nancy Guthrie's residence. It didn't belong to a searcher. The FBI's analysis was chilling. Visually, it was a dead ringer for the handwear worn by the masked phantom on Nancy's doorbell cam, and it carried a secret DNA from an unidentified male. It is crucial to note that this was not the same item splashed across the New York Post and circulated online. The tabloid ran a photo on February 11th of a black glove found less than 2 miles from the victim's house. When CNN pressed the Bureau on whether the evidence undergoing forensic testing was the object in the Post's images, the response was a flat no. The search had yielded multiple gloves, with some discovered as far as 10 miles from Guthrie's door. On Thursday, February 13th, the glove holding the DNA was flown to a private laboratory in Florida. The dossier landed on Friday. By Saturday, the Bureau had preliminary data in hand, waiting only for final quality checks and official verification before uploading the unknown male profile into the national DNA matrix known as CODIS. This isn't just a database. It is the FBI's central nervous system for forensics, housing over 19 million offender profiles and more than 1 million forensic samples. By November 2025, this system had generated over 781,000 hits, fueling more than 758,000 active investigations. In the world of modern manhunts, it is the apex predator of forensic tools. We saw the power of familial DNA, searches during the Idaho College murders, where genetic genealogy became the key that eventually unlocked the identity of Brian Kohberger. Now, the stakes are identical. If the DNA from that roadside glove hits a match in the system, investigators won't just have a lead, they'll have a name. And the geography screams for attention. Found 2 miles from Nancy's residence, discarded on the shoulder of the road, that glove sketches a potential escape vector. It suggests the exact path the predator took the moment he stepped off the property. If this piece of evidence connects to the figure caught on the doorbell cam, it doesn't just identify a suspect. It reveals their direction of flight, their mode of transport, and effectively shrinks the dragnet for further evidence. However, the date, FBI has issued a caveat. The link between the recovered glove and the one in the surveillance grain is currently based on visual consistency, not forensic certainty. The lab work to confirm whether this is undeniably the same article of clothing worn by the intruder is still in motion. Sheriff Nanos also dropped a critical detail. Investigators have been collecting buccal swabs from various individuals encountered throughout the inquiry. This means they are building an exclusion list, holding DNA samples from everyone questioned during the preliminary phase. This allows them to instantly eliminate innocent parties and isolate the unknown profile against those who have already appeared on the investigative radar. Meanwhile, a different kind of technology has taken to the sky. Reports from News Nation indicate a helicopter equipped with a specialized signal interceptor has been deployed. This airborne unit is scanning for the faint pulse of Nancy Guthrie's pacemaker. A retired FBI agent clarified the limitations. These medical devices transmit extremely short-range alerts. To catch that whisper of a signal, the chopper has to fly aggressively low, practically on top of Nancy's location. It's a needle-in-a-haystack maneuver, a desperate audible, but it shows a task force willing to exhaust every technological avenue. As of this recording, the DNA findings remain under seal. The Bureau notes that once the profile clears quality control, the upload to CODIS usually clocks in at 24 hours. That single data point has the potential to blow the case wide open, or it could dissolve into another dead end. But right now, that glove, sitting in a field 2 miles from the empty house, represents the most volatile piece of physical reality we have. I want to dissect the chilling questions this crime scene forces us to ask. No wild theories, no guesswork, just the raw interrogatives born from the evidence investigators have released to the public. Who spends 41 minutes inside Nancy Guthrie's home, and why? That kind of duration implies either a terrifying comfort level with the layout or a sociopathic indifference to the danger of discovery. Neither scenario fits the profile of a random drifter hitting a house they've never stepped foot in. How did the intruder possess the technical knowledge to blind Nancy's doorbell camera? They didn't just smash it. They tampered with the hardware. They knew its location. They knew it had to be silenced. That specific intelligence suggests prior access, maybe from a past life as a contractor, a service technician, or through calculated stalking. But you do not improvise that kind of sabotage at 1:47 in the morning on your first run. And why was Nancy's medication abandoned? If this was a kidnap for ransom scenario, keeping the asset alive is the baseline requirement. The pills were visible. They were within reach. Leaving them behind is either a sign of catastrophic amateurism or a dark signal that long-term survival was never on the table. Why did the ransom negotiation disintegrate? 2 deadlines came and went. No proof of life ever materialized. No channel to the family was ever opened. The entire ransom narrative collapsed in a way that defies the logic of professional kidnapping operations. And why did this strike happen on the precise weekend Savannah was booked for international travel? Savannah was slated to fly to Milan for NBC's Olympic broadcast. These are not last-minute trips. They are locked in weeks or months ahead of time. A perpetrator, aware of that schedule, would know that Nancy's primary support network would be oceans away and paralyzed to act. The timing could be chance, but in investigations, there are no coincidences. Finally, why did Sheriff Nanos call in the homicide unit before a body was even recovered? That was a public, deliberate signal. It meant he saw something at that scene that whispered of a tragedy far darker than a simple disappearance. He hasn't shown his cards on what that evidence was, but his 6 words, "There is something that is not right here," are as close to a grim warning as a lawman will ever get. give. These riddles remain unsolved in the public eye. Answers may be buried for weeks, perhaps months, but they are the full, specific threads detectives are quietly pulling at behind the curtain while the world holds its breath. As the probe ground into its third week, the friction between agencies began to show. Reuters broke the story that federal agents had demanded custody of critical evidence, specifically gloves and genetic material, for analysis at their central lab in Quantico, Virginia. But Sheriff Nanos reportedly dug in, insisting the items go to a private facility in Florida instead. Nanos rejected the obstruction narrative, branding the report false and claiming the logistical decision was made in concert with regional FBI brass. His justification was continuity. Route everything to the same lab where the case's existing DNA profiles were already being built. A logical defense, perhaps, but the optics were disastrous. Nancy Grace warned on national television that mishandling the biological evidence could destroy it entirely. Meanwhile, reports surfaced that only one local investigator assigned to the file had more than 2 years on the homicide desk. Worse, the crime scene at the victim's residence was unsealed and then hastily retaped a procedural lapse, creating a gap where the integrity of the evidence could have been shattered. But the most glaring institutional failure may have been the timeline of federal intervention. The FBI didn't step in until late on February 2nd, more than 12 hours after the initial emergency dispatch. Sources indicate the Bureau had to knock on the door rather than being called in. Insiders characterized the Fed's early role as handcuffed, restricted to whatever crumbs the county would share. This sparked a debate regarding whether those first, fragile hours, the golden hour vital to any abduction case, were managed with the necessary firepower and sophistication. The Pima County Sheriff's Department had gone dark, avoiding a full press briefing since February 5th. Sheriff Nanos filtered updates through hand-picked media outlets, but a comprehensive situation report never materialized. The department vowed it would not hold another conference absent a major breakthrough to share with the watching world. The radio silence was heavy. In that void, the media circus spiraled. True crime streamers and digital sleuths flooded Tucson, swelling the press corps far beyond the traditional satellite trucks and network reporters who had been stationed there since day one. Jimmy Williams, who runs the YouTube channel Dolly Vision, told the BBC he had spent 5 days camped outside the victim's home, gaining over 8,000 subscribers since. The story broke. He admitted the rampant speculation only fed the public's hunger. Arizona State Representative Alma Hernandez lashed out on social media, publicly shaming these self-appointed journalists for turning a grave inquiry into a spectacle. Detectives on the ground echoed the frustration, stating that the aggressive rumor mill coverage from amateur creators was not just unhelpful, but in some instances actively dangerous. The frenzy drew dark parallels to the Lindbergh baby kidnapping of 1932, not regarding the mechanics of the crime, but for how the investigation was devoured by a 24/7 circus that threatened to eclipse the desperate search for an 84-year-old woman. Through the noise, the Guthrie family has remained relentless. Savannah abandoned her Olympic assignment the moment the news hit. She flew directly to Tucson and has been boots on the ground ever since, collaborating with detectives and issuing statements to maintain the public pressure that keeps her mother's name in the headlines. An NBC producer close to Savannah called that notification the single most traumatic moment of her life. She immediately mobilized to get to Arizona. NBC threw its full weight behind supporting one of its most prominent figures. On February 4th, Savannah and her siblings signaled the abductors that they were ready to deal and demanded proof of life. On February 7th, 1 week after the disappearance, they released a video where Savannah looked into the lens and promised, "We will pay." Her brother Cameron spoke to the captors directly. "To whoever is holding our mother, we are waiting to hear from you. We haven't heard a word. On February 15th, marking 2 full weeks since the abduction, Savannah posted again on Instagram. It has been 2 weeks since. Our mom was taken, and I just wanted to say that we still have hope. We still believe. Then she pivoted, speaking directly to the perpetrator. To whoever has her or knows where she is, it is never too late to do the right thing. You are not lost or alone. In a separate post, Savannah shared grainy home movies of her mother playing with them as children. Our lovely mom, the caption read. We will never give up on her. Thank you for your prayers and hope. In the shadow of the Catalina foothills, yellow blossoms, symbols of optimism, started emerging at the edge of Nancy's driveway, mere days after she vanished. It wasn't long before the site transformed into a growing shrine. Candles, scrawled, messages, keepsakes, and endless bouquets piled up at the gates of the estate Nancy had called home for half a century. A lone deputy stood watch over the drive, a silent sentinel, while news vans choked the street. Yet, the crowds continued to gather. Over at KVOA, the local NBC station where Savannah launched her career decades ago, the banner was draped across the exterior. The message was stark and demanding. Bring her home. Signatures from all over the nation covered it. Eduardo Ortiz, a neighbor, spoke to CNN near the memorial. We watch her every morning on the Today Show, he said. She feels like part of our family. We just felt compelled to be here. Then, on February 17th, the case reached the White House. President Trump told the New York Post he was ordering the Department of Justice to pursue the harshest federal penalties available against the perpetrators if Nancy wasn't returned safely. When pressed on whether that included capital punishment, Trump didn't hesitate. The most? Yeah, that's true. Meanwhile, Sheriff Nanos gave a statement to the New York Times that felt less like a comment and more like a vow. Maybe it happens in an hour. Maybe it takes weeks, months, or even years. But we won't stop. We will find Nancy, and we will catch this guy. But there is one detail that haunts me. 50 years. Nancy Guthrie spent 50 years inside those walls. She raised 3 children in those rooms. She preserved the memory of her late husband there. She watched javelinas raid her garden and just laughed it off. She attended Sunday service religiously and kept her daily pills on. The kitchen counter, always praising the gentle desert breeze. Then, in a 41-minute window between 1:47 and 2:28 on a January Saturday, a figure approached her door, masked and armed, and stole that peace forever. They spent exactly 41 minutes inside her sanctuary. They ignored the medication on the counter. They cut the cameras. They sent ransom demands that were nothing but dead ends. And then they slipped away into the very darkness Nancy had always cherished. As we speak, no one can say where Nancy Guthrie is. We don't know if she's still breathing. No arrests have been made. The only tangible clue that could unmask her abductor is a trace of DNA on a solitary glove discovered in a field 2 miles from her empty home. Yet, 30,000 tips have flooded in. Hundreds of detectives are grinding through the night. The FBI's most sophisticated forensic capabilities are being utilized, and a family, already scarred by profound tragedy, refuses to abandon the matriarch who anchored them through the storm. Someone out there knows what befell Nancy Guthrie. Someone knows who stepped onto that porch. Someone knows her location this very second. If you are watching this, contact the Bureau at 1-800-CALL-FBI. The Pima County Sheriff's Department is standing by at 520-351-4900. A $100,000 reward is on the table for information leading to Nancy's recovery or an arrest. Nancy Guthrie is 84 years old. She relies on a pacemaker. She requires daily medication to survive. Her family just wants her back, and this story is far from over.
In my last video, I laid out a series of coincidences surrounding Tommaso Cioni, the 4-hour window, the ownership behavior on the porch, the night trial vanished, the FBI returning to his home 5 separate times. That video reached a lot of people, and it raised a question I deliberately did not answer, pulling records. I have now been through the Pima County court system, property filings, band archives, social media accounts dating back to 2007, and what happens when you are close friends with someone for nearly 2 decades. Their life becomes familiar to you. Drop a comment below and tell me what you think. The camera system. They know the victim's routine. They know the family's finances. The operative is the person who physically executed the plan. The impulses. In behavioral analysis, DUI offenders are statistically more likely to engage in other risk-taking behaviors. It is not the crime itself he already trusts. Someone who understands the stakes. Someone who has already demonstrated a willingness to cross legal and moral lines. Someone who the person who commits it something they carry forward. Burglary teaches you how to move through a space that does not belong to you without alerting the resume of someone who has done some version of this before. Maybe not a kidnapping,